Chapter 98. Meng Qingqing was a little puzzled. Didn't you drive here? Also, she didn't have a schedule right now. Tang Yu looked at Pei Qi and smiled. I have a little friend who needs to go home first. Little friend. Meng Qingqing felt like she was going to explode on the other end of the phone. Tang Yu doted on Pei Qi like she was his daughter. Tang Yu put away his phone. Pei Qi's fingers shrank, but he gripped it tightly and said calmly, I'll walk you down. She didn't dare to retort because of what he said just now. She just looked at his slender and good-looking hand that was still holding hers. What's wrong? His smile was very warm as he led her outside. His hand had been holding hers all the way from the top floor to the first floor, and he didn't let go once. The lobby on the first floor was the most crowded when people got off work, but it was especially quiet today. Everyone was looking at the little girl in their CEO's hand. Pei Qi felt uncomfortable. She struggled for a long time but couldn't break free. Her face was slightly red, and she looked down. Even her ears and the flesh on the back of her neck were slightly red. She looked very attractive. The car was already parked at the entrance. Tang Yu led her over. The chauffeur got out of the car and opened the car door for Pei Qi. Before Pei Qi got into the car, Tang Yu pulled her into his arms and kissed her. The employees of Xingyuan felt like they were going to explode again. What a good Malisu plot. Pei Qi now understood why he did that. She looked up and said in a soft voice, Tang Yu, you did it for no reason. I just wanted to kiss you. He smiled and reached out to touch her little head. Then, he walked her into the car and closed the door. The chauffeur nodded and walked to the front to start the car. Tang Yu watched the car leave before walking back to the Xingyuan building. From that day on, all the employees of Xingyuan knew that Pei Qi was the CEO's girlfriend and that he liked her very much. Pei Qi returned to her apartment in Xia City by car. While she was in the car, she saw Zhou Meilin pacing back and forth at the entrance. Let's stop here. Pei Qi said softly, I want to take a walk. When the driver saw that they had arrived at the entrance of the neighborhood, he cooperated and stopped the car. Pei Qi got out. After the car drove away, she turned to look at Zhou Meilin. Zhou Meilin walked over awkwardly and said in a strange voice, that car wasn't bad. Although the Pei family wasn't bad, they had never bought a car that cost tens of millions. Pei Qi ignored her weird tone and asked directly, what's the matter? She doesn't even call me auntie anymore. She has become a rich wife after all. Zhou Meilin felt bad for Pei Qi. Pei Qi's eyes were a little cold. She carried her bag and walked into Xia City. However, Zhou Meilin couldn't let her in. The security guards of this neighborhood didn't know how to be flexible. They wouldn't let her in no matter what. So, she condescended to wait for Pei Qi at the entrance. Now that she saw Pei Qi enter, Zhou Meilin's mouth softened a little. Qi, of course auntie is looking for you for something. She looked inside the neighborhood and said in an even more weird tone, it's rare for auntie to come. Let's talk inside. Pei Qi stopped walking about 2 or 3 meters away from Zhou Meilin. Her expression was a little indifferent. If you have something to say it here. This isn't my house. If she could, Zhou Meilin would immediately tear Pei Qi apart. Chapter 99. Pei Qi didn't say anything, so Zhou Meilin simply said, Pei Huan is pregnant, so she must get married. Otherwise, she won't look good with a big belly. Jinrong family is a respectable family. Our Pei family can't be too shabby. You know your father's company. It's still half dead now. How can he have any spare money? So, auntie, are you going to sell me again? Pei Qi interrupted Zhou Meilin's words. Her voice was a little cold. Zhou Meilin was a little annoyed for a moment, and her face darkened. Pei Chi, are you just going to stand by and do nothing? Huan is your sister. She is also your daughter. Auntie, if you really care about her, find a way yourself. Pei Chi was disgusted. Pei Huan was a human, but was she not a human? Zhou Meilin's face was stiff, and so was her voice. I just want you and Tang Yu to talk. 100 million is a drop in the bucket for him. Pei Chi, you are so disappointing. Since you were young, you have been eating from me and using from me. Which thing is different from Pei Huan? The more Pei Chi listened, the colder her heart became. She looked at Zhou Meilin's twisted face and sneered. The biggest difference between me and Pei Huan is that my mother is different. Zhou Meilin narrowed her eyes. Anger rushed to her brain, and she temporarily lost her mind. She raised her hand and wanted to slap her. Pei Chi didn't have time to dodge, but Zhou Meilin's hand was caught by a big hand and thrown aside. Zhou Meilin took a few steps back and almost fell. After she stood still, she found that it was Tang Yu. Tang Yu's car stopped beside them. Pei Chi and Zhou Meilin didn't notice when he got out of the car. At this time, Pei Chi was a little embarrassed. She looked up at Tang Yu and couldn't say a word. Her origin, her family, her relationship with him, even if he was very good to her, it didn't change the fact that they were in a relationship of keeping. Tang Yu only glanced at her before looking at Zhou Meilin. He was so noble that Zhou Meilin didn't even dare to look up to him. You want another 100 million? Tang Yu's voice was even gentle. Zhou Meilin looked at him and shrank back. She was afraid, but she could not overcome her greed. She steeled her heart and said, Mr. Tang, my Chi is worth this much money. If she's already mine. Tang Yu looked at the vulgar woman in front of him indifferently. Her face had already changed after being mean for a long time. Zhou Meilin knew that she was in the wrong, so she whispered, come to think of it, I'm also Mr. Tang's mother-in-law. Pei Chi was so angry that she was about to cry. What kind of mother-in-law was she? Zhou Meilin had sold her out, and now she had the nerve to say this in front of her sugar daddy. Tang Yu smiled. I remember that you're not Pei Chi's mother. And you sold her out. Zhou Meilin felt a little guilty and didn't dare to say a word. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chi and suddenly said, you go in first. She looked up at him in surprise. There was only one word in his eyes, be obedient. Pei Chi hesitated for a moment but finally walked into the neighborhood. Although Zhou Meilin was unwilling, she didn't dare to say anything. After Pei Chi walked away, Tang Yu's gaze fell on Zhou Meilin's face again. Chapter 100. 100 million is fine, but I have a condition. Tang Yu's eyes were cold. Publish a newspaper and break off all relations with Pei Chi. Zhou Meilin took a deep breath and said in a sharp voice, that's absolutely impossible. If that was the case, then Pei Mingyi would definitely know that she had sold out Pei Chi. Tang Yu's eyes were even colder. Then get out. Don't let me see you in front of Pei Chi again. He had never said such vulgar words to an older woman, and Zhou Meilin was the first one. He turned around, got into the car, and drove into the neighborhood. Zhou Meilin stood there, gritting her teeth. Pei Chi, this wretched girl, did she think that she couldn't do anything to her now that she had found someone to rely on? However, at the moment, she really couldn't do anything to Pei Chi. Tang Yu returned to the apartment, threw his keys and briefcase on the porch, and walked in. He heard a slight sound coming from the kitchen, which should be Pei Chi cooking. He walked into the kitchen quietly, and Pei Chi stood in front of the kitchen counter, preparing ingredients with her back facing him. Her long hair was lifted, revealing a small part of her fair neck, and she was wearing a cartoon apron. She, however, unexpectedly tugged at his heartstrings. In Tang Yu's life plan, there were all kinds of ambitions, but there was no such thing as having a beautiful wife. But at this time, she appeared in his condominium and cooked for him so tenderly. His heart couldn't help but be slightly touched. He calmly walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist. His slightly hot lips gently bit the soft flesh behind her ear. His voice was also hot as he said, "Don't go if you don't want to." When he bit her, Pei Chi-Chi's body trembled. She wanted to turn around, but he held her waist firmly. After a while, Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip and said, "I'm afraid that Dad will be unhappy." Then, she continued to cut the vegetables, and the smell of the chicken soup in the pressure cooker was overflowing. Tang Yu sighed in his heart, and reached out to touch her earlobe. "Is Pei Mingi good to you?" Pei Chi-Chi didn't understand why he was concerned about this question, and she didn't know why he suddenly came back so early today. She didn't ask about the result of his conversation with Zhou Meilin, because she knew that Tang Yu wasn't a man who would easily compromise. Tang Yu let go of her and smiled. "I'm going to take a shower first." She turned to look at him, and he just smiled without saying anything else. After he left, Pei Chi-Chi was slightly startled. Then, she blushed and turned off the pressure cooker. She began to make chicken noodles seriously. She was silent that night, and she didn't feel happy until she lay on the bed. Tang Yu didn't force her, but he just lay next to her, holding her breasts with one hand and rubbing them slowly. Pei Chi-Chi's breath was a little messy, but she didn't dare to let him move his hands away. She could only endure it. She felt uneasy, and after enduring it for almost 2 hours, Mr. Tang was also in a good mood. She felt a little sleepy. Tang Yu abruptly turned her around in his arms, and they lay face to face. Pei Chi-Chi immediately sobered up. She raised her watery eyes and gazed at his handsome face. The light in the bedroom was dim, and it cast a heavy shadow on his face, so she couldn't see his expression clearly. Chapter 101. Pei Chi-Chi was wearing white silk pajamas. The style was conservative, which was what he liked. She felt uneasy and climbed onto his shoulder carefully. She pressed her face against his neck, right at the spot where his pulse was. She could feel it, beating vigorously. "Do you want it now?" Her voice was soft and shallow, but it was clear in the quiet night. Naturally, it was also very touching. His big palm slid down her slender waist, and the other hand was placed on her back. He did not go any further, but just hugged her a little closer. Her face and her entire body were buried in his embrace. This moment, it was extremely thrilling. At least, for the first time, she felt that he treasured her so much. That feeling made her think that it was an illusion. Slowly, Tang Yu said, "Chi-Chi, it's not your fault." She had been very careful with him, as a woman who had been bought for him. When he wanted her, she never said no. Even when she was tired and sleepy, she never rejected him. When he asked her to cook, she would cook. She was so obedient that he could not find any fault with her. But even so, Tang Yu was not satisfied. He felt that something was missing. He wanted more from her body. Pei Chi-Chi looked up, a little at a loss. She did not want anyone to see her weakness, but Tang Yu always saw her in the most pathetic state. She asked again with a trembling voice, "Do you want it now?" Tang Yu suddenly grabbed her hand, turned around, and pinned her to his body. Her black hair was scattered on the side of the pillow, and it was also tangled around his arm. The silk pajamas had long fallen apart because of the tangled hair. Tang Yu's eyes were almost bloodshot. He stared at her eyes, not letting go of the slightest expression on her face. He asked her word by word, then, "Do you want me?" Pei Chi-Chi's eyes narrowed. She did not expect him to ask such a question. She felt danger and wanted to turn her head, but he used one hand to hold her little chin, not giving her a chance to escape. Tang Yu had never been so domineering in front of her. Pei Chi-Chi closed her eyes, her body trembling slightly. his eyes fixed on her, telling himself not to soften. Leaning against her neck, he narrowed his eyes and bit her artery. "Pei Chi, tell me, do you want it?" They had been together for quite some time, and he knew her body very well. In the past, he couldn't bear to see her suffer, so when it came to such matters, it was fine as long as both parties were comfortable. He didn't act rashly, but tonight, it was as if he wanted to drive her crazy and make her lose control. In less than half an hour, she was crying and begging him for mercy, telling him that she wanted to. That night, he did not let her go, even when her voice was hoarse. Just before dawn, she lay limp in his arms. Tang Yu's fingers patted her back from time to time. He knew that he had gone too far. She was still young, only 20 years old. He should not have used such methods on such a young girl, but he couldn't control himself. Pei Chi was exhausted. In her daze, she heard his gentle voice. "Chi, come with me that day." She closed her eyes, and her little hands hugged his waist subconsciously, and at that moment, Tang Yu knew what he was not satisfied with and felt that it was not enough. It was Pei Chi's heart. Chapter 102. Pei Chi couldn't get up for the whole day the next day. Her back was sore. Before Tang Yu left, he told her that she had applied for leave from school and company. She didn't refuse because she was really tired. Chen Xinjie called halfway. Pei Chi only said that she wasn't feeling well and didn't say anything else. Tang Yu was very busy that day. He had a business trip in the morning and didn't return to the office until 4:00 in the afternoon. When he returned to the top floor, he saw someone unexpected. Chen Xinjie. He remembered that she was Pei Chi's classmate, but why was she here? Xiao Ran followed behind Tang Yu and also glanced at Chen Xinjie. She was a woman, so she naturally thought more. She had been in the workplace for a few years and didn't believe in so-called friendship. Often, best friends were the ones who stabbed you the most unexpectedly, but enemies were different. They were as honest to you as ever. Tang Yu's footsteps still stopped. Chen Xinjie was carrying a backpack and holding a few books in her hands. She bowed to Tang Yu and said, "I'm here to deliver today's handouts to Chi and return the books I borrowed from her last time." She looked behind Tang Yu and seemed a little disappointed. "Chi isn't here. She's at home," Tang Yu said naturally, which made Xiao Ran, who was at the side, surprised. He was surprised that they lived together, and even more surprised that Tang Yu said it so straightforwardly. Chen Xinjie was also stunned, then she showed a cute little girl's smile. "Then I'll go find her." Tang Yu walked to the office without thinking and said, "Just give it to me, I'll bring it to her." Chen Xinjie stood there and didn't know what to do. Xiao Ran said calmly, "Go in." Chen Xinjie looked around and walked in as if she was dreaming. Chen Xinjie had the same reaction as when Pei Chi first came. Chen Xinjie carefully stepped on the pure white wool carpet and sat on the sofa uneasily. Xiao Ran asked the secretary to bring a glass of juice. Tang Yu went to deal with some things before he came over and sat opposite Chen Xinjie. "Where's the thing?" Chen Xinjie quickly took out the notes and placed them in front of Tang Yu. She looked at Tang Yu's handsome face and his slender fingers and blushed slightly. Tang Yu flipped through it. Chen Xinjie's handwriting was beautiful and delicate, and her handwriting was neat. "I made an extra copy for Chi, Chen Xinjie added. Tang Yu closed it and said indifferently, "There's no need to go through so much trouble next time. Just make a copy." Chen Xinjie's face, which was originally smiling faintly, turned red. Tang Yu had already stood up. It was obvious that he wanted to see her out, but he took the notes with him. Chen Xinjie understood in her heart that the reason why he wanted to see her was because of Pei Chi. She could walk into this building because of Pei Chi's name. She grabbed her bag and said after a while, "Mr. Tang, I borrowed Chi's books last time. I brought them with me." Please give them to her, she paused and said hesitantly, these books are very important to her. Tang Yu turned around and took the books from her hand. They seemed to be borrowed from the library, and there was a square stamp on them. Chen Xinjia also knew that it was boring to stay, so she left quickly. Tang Yu put the books and the notes on the desk. He was going to work, but his eyes fell on the books. He suddenly wanted to know what books Pei Chi-Chi usually read. Chapter 103. On the book's borrowing record, the last name recorded was Jin Rong. Tang Yu looked at it quietly for a long time before he picked up a few other books. They were all the same. Lin Jinrong's name was above Pei Chi-Chi's. The two names stung his eyes when they were next to each other. Especially when she borrowed it. It was after he and Pei Chi-Chi got together. Perhaps Pei Chi-Chi didn't have any other thoughts, but there was a kind of liking that was called habit. Tang Yu put down the book and let out a long sigh. Suddenly, he didn't have the mood to work anymore. He read the two books until 6 in the evening. Xiao Ran came in with a stack of documents in her hands. She was surprised to see that the president's expression was a little serious and that he was smoking. There were a few books in front of him. They were definitely not Xing Yuan's information. She put the documents on the table and said softly, President, do you need to work overtime today? Do you need me to order food for you? She saw that Tang Yu had no intention of leaving. Tang Yu looked up at Xiao Ran. He looked a little confused and a little bitter. At least in Xiao Ran's eyes, Tang Yu put out the cigarette in his hand. No need, you can go home first. Xiao Ran wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, she didn't say anything and left. Her intuition told her that the president's depression had something to do with Pei Chi-Chi. He carefully closed the door, and the spacious room became quiet again. Tang Yu's body sank deeply into the leather chair, and there was a slight sound of friction between his clothes and the chair. He closed his eyes and his slender fingers rhythmically tapped on the armrest beside him. His phone on the desk rang. He sat up slightly and reached out to take the phone. It was a call from Pei Chi-Chi. Tang Yu stared at the phone screen for a few seconds and finally picked it up. However, his voice was a little hoarse. Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little soft, with her usual cleverness. Are you coming back for dinner? He didn't speak. The other side was silent for a while before a cautious voice said, Do you need me to make chicken noodles for you? Tang Yu was a little annoyed that she kept addressing him as you. He sat up straight and reached out to unbutton the collar of his shirt. After unbuttoning 2 buttons, he said in a cold voice, Do you need to address me like that? Pei Chi-Chi stabbed him once and did not say anything else. Tang Yu couldn't bear it any longer. She closed her eyes, and the image of her and Jinrong's names together appeared in her mind. He really wanted to ask her if she still liked Jinrong. But his pride and his age did not allow him to ask. He didn't hang up the phone, and she didn't dare to either. The two of them were in a stalemate. Pei Chi-Chi naturally felt his displeasure. As for why he was unhappy, she had no way of knowing. She only knew that tonight would probably not be a good night, unless he didn't come back. After a long time, Tang Yu finally said slowly, Pei Chi-Chi, I said that we'll get married if we have a child. Will you get pregnant just to marry me? Pei Chi-Chi was completely stunned. She remembered what he said last time, but she didn't take it seriously. If a man, especially a man who bought her, said something like that in bed, she would be doomed eternally if she took it seriously. But at this moment, he seemed to be asking for something from her very seriously. Pei Chi-Chi didn't know what else he could ask of her other than her appearance. Chapter 104. She was afraid that if she answered, he would ask to have a child with her, and maybe he would impregnate her tonight. He had been taking precautions before. During the safe period, he naturally had no scruples, but during the dangerous period, no matter how passionate he was, he still remembered to use that at the last moment. She fell silent. Tang Yu listened to the light breathing on the other side, smiled faintly, and changed the topic. I may not come back. You should go to bed early. He was kind to her, but this made him feel uncomfortable. Tang Yu hung up the phone. Of course, he was unhappy, even if it was a little trick from a little girl like Chen Xinjie, he still couldn't help but care. Tang Yu sat until 8 o'clock. He walked to the French window and smoked a cigarette. His eyes were a little sore and dry. He took out his phone and dialed Meng Qingqing's number. Qingqing, come out for a drink. Meng Qingqing didn't quite believe his ears. Tang Yu, who had been very lonely at home recently, said that he wanted to come out for a drink. Most men who said that they wanted to drink at this time were planning to have a good time. Had Pei Shaoqi fallen out of favor so quickly? An hour later, Tang Yu and Meng Qingqing sat together in the private room of the fireworks club. The manager here had personally served them, and he had specially picked two very good-looking girls. Seeing that Tang Yu didn't refuse, Meng Qingqing was even more certain that Pei Shaoqi had probably annoyed Tang Yu. Holding a glass of wine in his hand, he slowly sipped it while looking at Tang Yu's expression. Pei Qiqi is still young. She's a child, after all. Take your time to teach her. In terms of appearance, the two girls today were not bad, but compared to Pei Qiqi, they were still a long way off. Tang Yu was used to eating big meals, so how could he eat such light dishes? Tang Yu took a sip of wine, playing with the exquisite crystal glass with his slender fingers, and looked at Meng Qingqing. She's too sensible. Was he annoyed because he was too sensible? Meng Qingqing smiled flirtatiously. Then you're in the wrong. Aren't women bought to be obedient and well-behaved? Wasn't he just looking for trouble by messing around with him all day long? Tang Yu collapsed on the leather sofa behind him. Under the refraction of the chandelier, his handsome face was mesmerizing. There was a slight blush on it, and it was exquisite to the extreme. Even though Meng Qingqing was a man, he couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat at this moment. If Xingyuan were to go bankrupt one day, Tang Yu would be able to thrive just by relying on his looks. Qingqing, what if I didn't treat her as a woman I bought? Tang Yu propped his forehead with one hand and looked sideways at Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing almost spat out the mouthful of wine in his mouth. He knew that Tang Yu liked Pei Qiqi very much and treated her like a little treasure, but what was the situation now? Tang Yu closed his eyes slightly, and his voice was actually a murmur with a hint of disappointment. But she has someone she likes, Qingqing, should I fulfill her wish? She liked Jinrong so much, and that kind of love was wonderful, so wonderful that he felt that buying her was especially shameless. Meng Qingqing was completely stunned. Tang Yu was troubled by love today, not because he was angry at Pei Qiqi. In other words, Tang Yu's emotions counted as love. Meng Qingqing's heart was a little confused. He didn't expect a person like Tang Yu to fall in love with a woman so easily. Chapter 105. She was just a young lady. Other than having physical contact with Tang Yu, she could also communicate telepathically. Yes, it must be chicken soup. Didn't Pei Qiqi make chicken noodles for Tang Yu? Too much chicken soup. It seems that Pei Qiqi's chicken soup is not bad. Meng Qingqing concluded. Late at night, Meng Qingqing left. Tang Yu lay on the sofa in the private room. His throat was a little dry, probably because he had too much to drink. An innocent girl was kneeling beside him. She was wearing a black dress, and her pair of fair legs looked very seductive as she knelt there. She unbuttoned his shirt with her small hands and looked up at Tang Yu's handsome face. Her face was a little red. Before Meng Qingqing left, he told her to serve Mr. Tang well. She was trained in the club, and she was clean. She was used to receiving important clients. She had no experience, but she had taken such classes. So, she kissed Tang Yu's neck and slowly moved downwards. She did not dare to kiss his lips right away because the person who taught her said that some men did not like kissing. Unless they took the initiative, they should not move their lips easily. Half drunk, Tang Yu vaguely felt that someone was kissing him, Chi-Chi. He groaned, and out of habit, his big hand grabbed her long hair. He forced her little face up and wanted to kiss her. Under the bright lights, he saw an unfamiliar face. Although she was beautiful, she was not Pei Chi-Chi. Instantly, the excitement in his heart faded away. Yu Yu's hopes also cooled down. Tang Yu pulled the girl away and threw her aside. He got up and buttoned his shirt. The girl fell to the side with her skirt rolled up. She was kneeling on one knee. She looked very pitiful and very attractive. Seeing that Tang Yu was about to leave, she quickly got up and hugged him from behind. Her voice was gentle and cute. "Mr. Tang, did I do a bad job?" She stood on tiptoe and wanted to kiss the back of his neck, but Tang Yu pushed her away. "You did a good job. I'll ask someone to give you the check." The girl bit her lip and did not dare to do it again. It was just that she was unwilling. Tang Yu's condition was that even if she spent a month with him, she wouldn't have to sell herself here anymore. Tang Yu did not stay and directly walked out. In the elevator, he looked at his slightly messy appearance and touched his forehead. He did not seem to reject women as much anymore. If he wanted to, he could have this girl. But, not her, he did not want it. Physically, he could accept it, but mentally, he did not want it. He suddenly chuckled softly. In addition to helplessness, there was also a hint of recognition. When he got into the car, he was completely sober. He made a call to Meng Qingqing. "Set off immediately for that project in Africa. Don't come back for a month." On the other side, Meng Qingqing was flirting with the pretty girl. Although he was just angry, this was Tang Yu's revenge, because he gave him a woman. If he did not want her, then he did not want her. Instead, he acted like an innocent young man and kept his virginity for Pei Chi-Chi. Tang Yu hung up the phone and smoked another cigarette. Then, he started the car and drove back to Xia City. When he got home, the lights were turned off. It was dark everywhere. Chapter 106. He looked at her silently for a while, walked over and carried her to the center of the bed. Pei Chi-Chi woke up with a start. She didn't sleep well to begin with, so the slightest movement could wake her up. She opened her eyes and looked at him in the dark. She also smelled the alcohol on him, and the scent of his perfume. Her eyes were a little wide. She just looked at him, not knowing how to react. Tang Yu knew that she was awake, so he reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. She wasn't used to the light and closed her eyes subconsciously. Tang Yu put her down and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm going to take a shower." "You drank?" She sat up and looked at the time. It was already 1 o'clock. Tang Yu took a bathrobe and replied casually. Before entering the bathroom, he added, "Chen Xinjie sent the handouts and your books to my office in the afternoon. They are now on the table outside." With that, he walked into the bathroom. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. When she heard the sound of running water in the bathroom, she lifted the quilt and got off the bed, walking to the living room outside. When the bathroom door opened, Tang Yu looked at the empty bed with a storm in his eyes. Outside, Pei Chi-Chi picked up the books, flipped them open, and looked at the pages. Chen Xinjie had borrowed these books with her library card. In the past, Lin Jinrong had indeed borrowed these books. She would borrow them once and write her name on them. But this time, she wasn't the one who borrowed them. She understood what Tang Yu meant. First, he wanted to tell her the truth, and he wanted to tell her what Chen Xinjie had expressed in front of him. Pei Chi lowered her eyes and put down the books. She flipped through the handouts and put them down. She walked back to the bedroom. Tang Yu had already taken a shower and was leaning against the headboard with the lights turned off. Her heart tightened. Every time he did this, it meant that he wanted her tonight. It was already so late, and he was covered in the smell of his perfume. Hadn't he used up his energy? She carefully grabbed the front of her shirt and walked over to sit by the bed. The books were borrowed by Qin Xinjie. But she didn't explain anything else because she had indeed done such a thing before. And Tang Yu obviously already knew. He must have sensed it before. Perhaps it was during Lin Jinrong's engagement banquet, or perhaps it was when Lin Jinrong came here. He didn't say anything, just grunted. Pei Chi lifted her eyes and looked into his eyes. She didn't know what he thought, and she wasn't going to deny it. This was Pei Chi-Chi's little backbone. She had liked someone, but if she didn't dare to admit it, how could it be called liking someone? Finally, he said indifferently, if you need any information in the future, I'll get Xiao Ran to look for it for you. Pei Chi was overwhelmed by the favor. Was this considered letting her go? After saying that, Tang Yu patted the spot in front of him. He sat with his legs apart. His intention was very obvious. Pei Chi carefully sat down and knelt in the middle of his body. She lifted her face and let him kiss her. Tang Yu looked at her fair face and squinted his eyes for a while. Then, he pinched her chin with his slender fingers and kissed her lips. Her body was a little stiff, unlike usual. Although she was usually a little passive, it was never like this. When he wanted to kiss her deeply, Pei Chi pushed him away. She was panting and her breathing was a little messy. There was a trace of fear in her eyes. His voice was a little strict. Pei Chi, come over here. Chapter 107. He came back smelling of perfume today, so she didn't want to have sex with him. She was cheap and sold him out, but she wasn't cheap enough to serve the same man on the same day as someone else. She was stubbornly stiff and refused to go over. Tang Yu was a little angry. He pulled her over and pressed her down. Chi, don't reject me. His voice was husky. It was rare for him to be so forceful, but it was only when he met Lin Jinrong. Pei Chi turned her face away. She was a little embarrassed. He knew it, and yet he wanted her at such a time. After he was with another woman, Tang Yu kissed her and tasted her tears. He hardened his heart against her and didn't stop. In the end, he still flipped to the side. She was so stiff that he couldn't do it at all. But he was a little unwilling. He reached out and pulled her stiff body into his arms. His large palm moved downwards. She wasn't aroused. Because of him. He didn't mention Lin Jinrong's name, but she could guess it. Pei Chi body was trembling. Her whole body was stiff in his arms. After a long time, she came back to her senses and said with a trembling voice, "No." He pinched her little chin with his fingers and looked at her expression carefully. His voice was also a little tense. Then why? Pei Chi bit her lip. She didn't want to say it, but he forced her and used many methods. She felt a little pain and finally cried softly on his shoulder. Didn't you do it tonight? Why did you still provoke me? Her little body was trembling in his arms. It was indescribably lovable, and her voice was also aggrieved. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment. He remembered how she knew. He reached out to pull her out of his arms and kissed away the tears at the corner of her eyes helplessly. He had never coaxed a girl before. He didn't even do it when an arrogant person like Shen Lian threw a tantrum. At this moment, he coaxed the little person in his arms like a treasure. She was the one who made him unhappy. Kissing away her tears bit by bit, he cupped her little face with his large palms and said softly, "I didn't touch her." Pei Chi lowered her eyes, her eyelashes trembling slightly. She didn't say anything. She was not his wife. Whether he had or not, she had no say in it. Tang Yu repeated, Chi, I didn't. She nodded, but her reaction didn't satisfy him, so he held her little hand. She looked at him with her eyes wide open as if she was scalded. Her eyes were wet like a little kitten. He looked into her eyes, and slowly, a light smile appeared in his eyes. He told himself, Tang Yu, that's it. It's her. He had struggled and thought about giving up on her, but in the end, he couldn't do it. He could not give her to any man other than Jean Rong. I said no means no. His fingertips gently caressed her delicate little face. Every time he touched her little face, her body would tremble slightly. He felt that it was very interesting, and the anger in his heart lessened a lot. What about now? He started kissing her. He wanted her forcefully and firmly, even though she was crying, even though she was still in pain. Chapter 108. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, Tang Yu took a look at the books. He was still a little bothered about it as he looked at her. Have you thought it through? He was asking about Qin Xinjie. Pei Chi knew what he meant and replied, I know. Looking at her lowered brows and her submissive look, he snorted. You don't have to be so obedient in the future. He hoped that she would throw a tantrum at him. However, the moment he said that, Pei Chi looked up at him and said slowly, if I hadn't been obedient, you wouldn't have gotten what you wanted last night. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment before he laughed. She really dared to talk back to him. Did she mean that he had forced himself on her last night? He did not say anything else and continued to eat breakfast. After eating, they sat in the car together and fastened their seatbelts. He said indifferently, weren't you there last night? I remember you hugged me and said harder. He said such intimate words with such a prideful expression. Pei Chi was a little speechless and couldn't deny it. Tang Yu smiled and started the car. However, he was a little satisfied in his heart. She cared and didn't cooperate last night because she thought that he had slept with someone else. As for why he smelled of perfume, he did not explain too much. After all, she did not confess about herself. When the car arrived at the entrance of B University, Pei Chi got off the car and said goodbye to him obediently. When she turned around, she saw Qin Xinjie. Qin Xinjie waved at her excitedly. Pei Chi walked over with her bag. In her hand were the books that Qin Xinjie had sent. Tang Yu had asked her to return them today. His tone was a little domineering and childish in her eyes. Qin Xinjie took the books and looked a little puzzled. Chi, what's wrong? Didn't Lin Jinrong borrow these books? In the past, you... Before she could finish, Pei Chi interrupted her. Xinjie, the past is the past. Now is the present. Do you think I need to do this? Qin Xinjie's expression was a little hurt. After a long time, she asked softly, Chi, are you angry? Pei Chi smiled faintly. No, but don't do it again. All right, I'll return it in the morning. Qin Xinjie smiled and grabbed Pei Chi's arm. You're the best. Of course, you won't be angry with me. Pei Chi pinched her nose and a trace of coldness flashed across her eyes. At this moment, Qin Xinjie was stunned. She pointed in a direction and said softly, Chi, look. It's Lin Jinrong. Pei Chi didn't look at Lin Jinrong, but at Qin Xinjie's expression. At that moment, she understood everything. In Qin Xinjie's eyes, there was infatuation, struggle, and pain. She lowered her eyes and thought to herself that she had been so careless all this time. Qin Xinjie actually liked Lin Jinrong. However, Qin Xinjie still kept telling her how much Lin Jinrong liked her. Pei Chi, you must seize this opportunity. So, Chen Xinjie had a motive for being so nice to her. It was only now that she could tell that Chen Xinjie was so scheming. Chen Xinjie must have been the one behind the incident on the school's website. At noon, Pei Qiqi went to the library. Chen Xinjie had said that she would return the books, but she hadn't. Chapter 109. After school, she didn't wait for Chen Xinjie and directly walked out of the school gate. There was a bus directly to Xingyuan at the school gate. Pei Qiqi stood there, and there happened to be a tree behind the bus stop, shielding her from the harsh sunlight. A white beetle slowly stopped, and the window slid down. Inside sat a long-haired girl in a red dress, wearing a pair of sunglasses on her delicate little face. "Are you Miss Pei?" The girl looked at Pei Qiqi through a layer of sunglasses. Pei Qiqi lowered her eyes and looked at her. She wasn't sure why this girl knew her, so she didn't say anything. The girl called Tian Tian was a little displeased, and her voice also became a few degrees colder. "I want to talk to you. Get in." In her heart, there was no difference between Pei Qiqi and herself. The only difference was that she might be sold to many men, while Pei Qiqi currently only had Tang Yu. She was the woman who waited on Tang Yu last night, but Tang Yu didn't want her. But how could a woman in a brothel give up so easily? She quickly learned of the existence of Pei Qiqi through her channels. At first glance, she was shocked. She had never seen a girl with such good innate qualities. Delicate and fragile to the right extent. Any more and she would appear too weak. Pei Qiqi looked at Tian Tian and her famous mistress car and roughly understood who the person in front of her was. The owner of the perfume on Tang Yu last night. "I don't know you. You should be looking for Tang Yu." Pei Qiqi carried her bag and walked to the bus that slowly passed by. Tian Tian gritted her teeth and was extremely angry. Just as she was about to get off, the bus driver behind her became impatient and madly honked. Only then did she reluctantly drive away. Less than half an hour after Pei Qiqi went to Xingyuan, Xiao Ran came over and said that the president invited her over. All eyes were on her with inexplicable meaning. Pei Qiqi knew that if she didn't go, she would be ungrateful. But thinking about that woman today, she pursed her lips. "I don't want to go. It's not that he's busy, it's not that he's a bad influence, it's just that he doesn't want to go." How much did he dote on her that Pei Qiqi dared to say those 3 words to the CEO? How many people wanted to step into that office, even in their dreams? Pei Qiqi actually didn't want to go. Xiao Ran had known that the CEO was in a bad mood last night, but it seemed that the CEO was in a bad mood today. This time, it was Pei Qiqi's turn to be unhappy. She had a rough idea of what was going on. She smiled and said, "All right, I'll pass the message to the CEO." She walked out briskly, and in the elevator she put her hand to her forehead and chuckled softly. This was probably what love was. When Xiao Ran said that to Tang Yu just smiled faintly and continued to work with his head lowered. He just said casually, "Take the snacks on the table to the secretary's office and share them." Of course, as Xiao Ran was tactful. These were prepared by the CEO for Pei Qiqi. Although he said that, he couldn't just eat it. So he said, "Then I'll send one to Qiqi." By calling Qiqi, she not only got closer to her relationship with Pei Qiqi, but also her relationship with the CEO. This was a test, and it was a subtle relationship that only a veteran in the workplace could perceive. Sure enough, Tang Yu heard it. He looked up at Xiao Ran and smiled. Chapter 110. Xiao Ran only left 2 boxes in the secretary's office and sent the other 4 boxes to the design department. The CEO's attitude was very clear. It was not as simple as a short relationship. The CEO had Pei Qiqi in his heart. When a woman could control a man's emotions, the man had already been conquered. Pei Chi did not even need to use a single soldier to easily capture the legend of Xing Yuan. Xiao Ran sent the snacks over. The people in the design department ate them and became especially enthusiastic towards Pei Chi. They were all 1,000-year-old foxes. Which one of them didn't know what was going on? Xiao Ran was the CEO's chief secretary. He usually only served the CEO. Today, he had run to them twice for a small matter. Pei Chi was the person who was most likely to rise to the top. Now that this phoenix was in their design department, how could they not curry favor with her? Pei Chi felt a little uncomfortable. She did not want others to treat her differently. She finally felt that it was not so easy to touch Tang Yu's light. She did not need to work hard. Most of the proposals for her previous works were sent to her email. She also added a lot of people on QQ and WeChat. Xiao Ran completed his task and left leisurely. As for Pei Chi, she did not do anything for the past 2 hours. She was busy grouping the new people into groups. Some sharp-eyed people saw that the first name in Pei Chi's contact list was Tang Yu. At 5:00, Pei Chi packed her things and was ready to get off work. Tang Yu appeared at the door of the design department. The people who were about to get off work immediately sat down and pretended to be very busy. Pei Chi stood there. Tang Yu walked over just like that. She looked up at him. "Are you ready?" His voice was gentle, with a certain restraint. Pei Chi nodded subconsciously. Tang Yu naturally took the bag from her hands. "Let's go." Everyone gasped. The president actually helped Pei Chi carry her bag. Pei Chi was obviously flattered. She wanted to take it, but he had already walked to the door. She hurriedly followed him and said in a small voice, "I want to see Dad." With one hand, Tang Yu held her shoulder and half-carried her to the elevator. When there was no one around, he looked down at her. "I'll send you there later." He did have some business to deal with, but he wanted to stay with her. So when Xiao Ran couldn't invite her, and the little kid was obviously angry with him, he came down to catch her, regardless of his status. But now, his little friend said she wanted to go back to see her father. He thought uncomfortably. She had called him father when she was sick, so he was her father too. Pei Chi raised her eyes and looked at him in a daze. She thought of that beetle again. She turned her face away angrily. "I want to go by myself." He was still angry. He reached out and ruffled her hair. Smiling, he said, "I've told you before." With that, he suddenly bent down, as if he was talking to a little boy, the tip of his nose against the tip of his nose and his forehead against hers. She was surrounded by his scent, so hot that she didn't know what to do. Pei Chi was a little uneasy. She pursed her lips and couldn't speak for a long time. Tang Yu kissed her lightly. He didn't force it and straightened his body. "Be careful on the road. I'll pick you up later." Chapter 111. Pei Chi replied softly and took the backpack from his hands. They were already at the top floor, and there were a few higher-ups waiting for her, but Tang Yu still pressed the first floor button and sent her down. Pei Chi declined the driver's offer and took the bus. She didn't want to be so high-profile in front of Zhou Meilin, as that would only make Zhou Meilin mock her. After getting off the bus, she still had to walk a few hundred meters. Because it was summer, the sun went down very late, so when it was close to 6:00, the sun was still very strong. She took out an umbrella from her bag to block the sun, as well as her face. There was a small park about 200 meters away from the Pei family's villa. There were more than 10 cars parked by the side of the road, and most of them were people who had brought their children over to play. Just as Pei Chi was about to walk over, she heard a familiar voice. She couldn't be mistaken, it was Zhou Meilin's voice. Pei Chichi's body froze, and she instinctively covered her body under the umbrella. She took a step back, stood beside a tree, and looked over carefully. Ronglei, will we not be able to make money from this investment? Zhou Meilin and a relatively young man stood in front of a white sports car. The man named Ronglei was about 30 years old, and he had combed his hair back. One look and you could tell that he was a gigolo. He leaned against the sports car and coaxed Zhou Meilin, who was over 40 years old. Baby, of course we'll be able to make money. It's just a matter of time. Zhou Meilin looked worried. But we've already invested tens of millions. Last time, I withdrew so much money from Pei Ming and that dead man's account behind his back, and the company almost went bankrupt. Now that we have to put in so much money again, I'm worried that we'll lose everything. Ronglei, I'm a little scared. When the time comes, don't worry. The money invested will all come back in the end. When this project earns a lot of money, I'll bring you far away. You don't have to look at that old man's face anymore. As the pretty boy with the surname Rong spoke, he went forward and pinched Zhou Meilin twice. The middle-aged Zhou Meilin was coaxed happily, but she still had some misgivings. She said angrily, "You're just saying. How can I really go with you?" Although Pei Mingyi, that bastard, is useless, Pei Huan is looking for the Lin family, Ronglei smiled frivolously. I know you can't bear to part with this wealth, but it doesn't matter, as long as we truly love each other. As he spoke, he forcefully pressed Zhou Meilin against the car and kissed her. From the way they caressed each other, it was obvious that they had known each other for a long time. Pei Chichi's blood froze. She didn't like Zhou Meilin, and Zhou Meilin didn't like her. But she had always thought that Zhou Meilin loved her father, and that was why she couldn't tolerate her. She didn't expect Zhou Meilin to have a pretty boy outside. The previous crisis of the Pei Corporation couldn't be solved because Zhou Meilin had withdrawn the company's funds. Pei Chichi wanted to rush out, but she couldn't. Zhou Meilin and Ronglei kissed for a long time, and she reached out to push him. We're going to die, people will see us. Ronglei's back was against the car door, and he smiled wickedly. Then let's get in the car. As he spoke, he pulled Zhou Meilin into the car. Zhou Meilin was also greedy, and she refused half-heartedly. Pei Chichi looked at the shaking car, and there was no expression on her face. But her stomach felt uncomfortable, and she wanted to vomit. Chapter 112. At this moment, she felt sorry for Pei Mingyi and felt sad for him. The family that he had supported with all his might had betrayed him long ago. When she arrived at the living room and saw Pei Mingyi's harmless face, Pei Chichi was stunned for a long time. Pei Mingyi brought out 2 plates of snacks from the kitchen and placed them in front of Pei Chichi. He was elated. Hurry up and eat. Your auntie isn't here. Pei Chichi looked at this honest man. Even when he was being nice to her, he had to hide from Zhou Meilin. But Zhou Meilin was having sex with another man 200 meters away from their house. Her voice was a little airy as she looked straight into Pei Mingyi's eyes. Daddy, do you know where Auntie went? Pei Mingyi noticed that something was wrong with Pei Chichi's expression. The smile on his face slowly froze. His face went from lively to stiff, and the muscles on his face twitched violently. After a long time, he smiled again, but it was not as natural as before. What else could it be? She's playing mahjong with her old friends. That wastrel can't be helped. As Pei Mingyi spoke, he looked at Pei Chichi cautiously. Pei Chichi knew in her heart that her father might have known about Zhou Meilin's affairs. Her lips trembled a little. She wanted to pretend that nothing had happened, but her expression betrayed her. Pei Mingyi remained silent for a long time before he looked up. His face seemed to have aged by more than 10 years, and his voice was a little deep. Chi-Chi, I'm the one who let your auntie down. She hasn't been happy all these years. If she's happier now, it's a good thing. As though he was consoling himself, he repeated, it's a good thing too. As he said that, he looked as though he was looking for a fruit knife to peel an apple for Pei Chi-Chi. A person who could peel a whole piece of apple skin from the inside would actually break into pieces. Pei Chi-Chi sat face to face with him. Pei Mingi forced a smile and looked down. Chi-Chi, it's better to pretend that you don't know about some things. That way, it'll be easier to live. Dad. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips into a straight line, her eyes a little hot. Previously, she had thought that she had helped Pei Mingi, but now she realized that the 100 million she had sold to Tang Yu had been used by Zhou Meilin as a gigolo. Her heart was filled with sorrow, but there was nothing she could do. She couldn't tell Pei Mingi about it. Pei Mingi's hand slowly moved up, and his face was bleak. Let's just make do like this. Dad just wants to see you and Pei Huan find a good home. Pei Chi-Chi saw helplessness and forbearance in his slightly cloudy eyes. In her heart, she knew that Pei Mingi's forbearance was mostly because of her. He was worried about her background, worried about whether she could continue staying in the Pei family. But what he didn't know was that she couldn't stay any longer. In the past, Pei Chi-Chi might have fallen out with Zhou Meilin, but just as Pei Mingi was wary of her, she was also wary of Pei Mingi. When Pei Chi-Chi left, her heart was heavy. Zhou Meilin came back too, carrying a small bag. Although she had tidied up properly, Zhou Meilin's face had an abnormal blush. Pei Chi-Chi had known about love affairs for a long time, so she could naturally tell the reason. She stood still and looked at Zhou Meilin. Zhou Meilin's voice was strange and high-pitched. Yo, you're leaving. Why? You're leaving the moment you see me. Are you afraid? She wanted to say, afraid that I'll ask you for money, but Zhou Meilin suddenly remembered that Pei Mingi was around and quickly shut her mouth. Chapter 113. Zhou Meilin had wanted to say a few harsh words, but Rong Lei had served her well, so she held it in. After Pei Chi-Chi left, she complained to Pei Mingi, Mingi, look at that bastard you raised outside. She has no manners at all. She doesn't even call you auntie anymore. Pei Mingi looked at her calmly. In your heart, she's a bastard. How can she respect you? Zhou Meilin sat down and brushed her wavy hair. I'm used to calling her that. Sensing that Pei Mingi had been staring at her, she sat up unnaturally. Why are you looking at me? Pei Mingi continued to stare at her. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, nice hairstyle. It cost me $3,000. Zhou Meilin said proudly as she carefully held it in her hand. Pei Mingi stared at his wife of more than 20 years. Suddenly, he said, help me to the bedroom. Zhou Meilin jumped in fright. She looked at Pei Mingi again and then softly said, you old pervert. It's broad daylight, and your bones can still be shaken a few times. Aren't you afraid that they will fall apart? As she said that, she glanced at Pei Mingi. Pei Mingi smiled. I just wanted to see if that thing could still be used. Zhou Meilin heaved a sigh of relief. As she walked to the kitchen, she called out, Auntie Ying, is the tonic for Sir ready? As Pei Mingi listened, he slowly stood up and walked upstairs. He closed the door and took out a will from the safe. After looking at it for a long time, he took out his phone and made a call. Lawyer Chin. I'm Pei Mingi. I need to trouble you with something again. Downstairs, Zhou Meilin was still busy with the tonic. Pei Chi-Chi walked out of the Pei residence. It took her a long time to walk the few hundred meters. There were no buses now, and she didn't want to ask Tang Yu to pick her up. She wanted to take a taxi back. A white Bugatti Veyron slowly stopped in front of her. The window rolled down, and Tang Yu's face appeared. It was only 7 o'clock. She just looked at him, unable to say a word. Get in the car. Tang Yu smiled gently. Pei Chi was in a daze for a while before she walked to the other side and opened the car door to sit beside him. Tang Yu held the steering wheel and focused on the front. There's milk tea next to it. You can have some if you're hungry. She lowered her head and saw the bag of milk tea. She looked up at his side profile and said in a low voice, Tang Yu, why are you so nice to me? Tang Yu smiled and focused on driving. He only took the time to answer her, but answering her was no different than not answering her. What do you think? Pei Chi didn't say anything else. She pursed her lips, but she was still shocked by the fact that Zhou Meilin kept a gigolo. After a long time, she hesitantly asked, if one day, your wife, had an affair, what would you do? He was a man. She wanted to know the answer. It happened to be a red light. Tang Yu stopped the car and looked at her seriously. He asked seriously, Pei Chi, would you have an affair? Pei Chi was stunned. She looked at him for a long time before saying softly, I'm asking about your wife. Yes, I'm asking you too. His expression was serious, and he didn't seem like he was joking. Pei Chi felt that her heart was beating a little fast, as though something was about to jump out of her mouth. She felt as though she was losing speed. Chapter 114. The air seemed to freeze. Pei Chi couldn't answer his question. If she did, it would be equivalent to admitting that she was his wife. He had mentioned the word marriage a few times, but she had never thought that Tang Yu wanted to marry her. Just then, his phone rang. Phone. Her voice was weak. Tang Yu's gaze didn't waver. He stared at her little face and said, don't worry about it. She wanted to say more, but she didn't dare to. She could only stare at him. Pei Chi deeply regretted it. She shouldn't have asked him. After a long time, the phone was still ringing. He finally reached out and picked it up. The voice on the other end was very soft and gentle. Brother, where are you? Tang Yu's gaze landed on Pei Chi again. He answered, I'm on the way. What's up? When he spoke, his voice was very low and deep. But the intimacy in his voice made Pei Chi look sideways. It should be a girl. Tang Axian was sitting at the entrance of Xia City's condominium. She pouted. Brother, come back quickly. I'm starving. Tang Yu smiled warmly. He knew that she was at his door. Okay. Don't run around. As he spoke, he put the phone back in its place. When he started the car, he also noticed that Pei Chi was still looking at him. My sister, Tang Axian. You don't mind taking her in for a night, do you? He asked her casually as he focused on driving. He didn't pursue what he said earlier. Pei Chi heaved a sigh of relief. But now, her expression tensed up again. Tang Axian. Her sister. She was now in Tang Yu's condominium. Pei Chi had seen that adorable child before. But she never thought that one day she would have to live under the same roof as her. She didn't speak for a long time. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to hold her little hand. He said in a low voice, Are you unhappy? Pei Chi shook her head absent-mindedly. No, I'm just not prepared. He held her hand with his warm hand. He looked at her and said something that made her heart jump. It's not like we're going to meet in-laws. What's there to be afraid of? Tang Axian is just a little kid. Pei Chi fingers twitched. She felt his warmth. She wanted to break free, but he held her hand tightly and didn't let go until they reached Xia City. She was completely focused on her hand. She didn't notice that Tang Yu was driving very fast. The car slowed down when they reached the condominium's car park. Pei Chi followed behind Tang Yu and arrived at his floor. When the elevator doors opened, she saw the familiar yet unfamiliar young girl, Tang Xian. Tang Xian was wearing a white Mickey Mouse top and a denim skirt. Her hair was tied into a ponytail and she carried a large bag on her back. She looked exactly like a young girl who had run away from home. Even though she didn't have the strength, her eyes were unusually bright as she looked at Pei Chi. She reached out to her. Hi! Even though she was weak, her eyes were unusually bright as she looked at Pei Chi. She reached out to her. Hi! Pei Chi raised the corner of her mouth. Only she knew how reluctant she was. Hello. Tang Yu didn't let go of Pei Chi. He swiped the key card and took the bag from his sister. How did you get here? Chapter 115. Tang Yu put down his bag and turned to look at Tang Xian. He had already put Pei Chi down and was looking at Tang Xian with his arms crossed. I'm asking, how did you get here? I didn't ask why. This reason. She had already said it countless times. Tang Xian lowered her head and played with her fingers like a primary school student. Her voice was also very soft. I took a taxi. She looked up and smiled. When she saw that Tang Yu's expression was still unpleasant, she looked at Pei Chi and tried to make a cute expression. Please help me. Pei Chi blinked. Tang Xian was actually really cute. Before Pei Chi could react, she had already said, didn't you say you were hungry? Yeah. Tang Xian stuck out her tongue and ran behind Pei Chi. She was still a little afraid of Tang Yu. Every time she came, her brother would not be nice to her. She gathered her courage and said, Brother, you're so fierce. You won't be able to find a wife. Tang Yu snorted coldly and looked at Pei Chi. His meaningful gaze made Pei Chi's face heat up. She didn't know why she was feeling hot. I'm going to cook. Pei Chi said softly. Tang Yu grabbed her hand and she turned her head away. I was going to eat outside. He only said half of the sentence. Tang Yu wasn't someone who was used to apologizing. Pei Chi smiled faintly. In fact, her mind was in a mess today and she wasn't in the mood to eat outside. She just wanted to be alone, but Tang Xian was full of curiosity about her. How could she let her be? Tang Xian ran into the kitchen and looked at Pei Chi eagerly, as if she was looking at delicious food. Pei Chi felt goosebumps all over her body. She went to the fridge and took out an orange and squeezed a glass of juice for her. Tang Xian held it in her hands and looked at Pei Chi skillfully preparing the ingredients. She was a little envious. Sister, you're so good. Pei Chi was shocked by the word sister. She smiled faintly and didn't turn around. A spoiled girl like Tang Xian wouldn't understand how it felt to live under the oppression of a stepmother like Zhou Meilin. Tang Xian finished the juice and became restless again. She stood behind Pei Chi and watched Chi. After a while, Tang Xian felt that her relationship with Chi had reached a certain level. Now that Pei Chi was with her brother, there was a high chance that she would become her sister-in-law in the future. Moreover, Chi was still so young. Calling her sister felt like she was too old. Tang Xian carefully tugged at Chi hair. Your hair is so black and shiny. Seeing that Pei Chi didn't have much of a reaction, she moved her hand down. Pei Chi was caught off guard and was taken advantage of. Tang Xian was still young, had always been sick, so she hadn't fully developed yet. She pinched Pei Chi there and sighed sincerely. Your butt is so perky. Her skin was also very white, she almost drooled as she looked at Pei Chi-Chi's soft and supple skin. Pei Chi-Chi almost jumped up from her touch. She turned around. Her gaze was extremely complicated. Tang Axian was a delicate girl. No, she was a little gangster. Tang Yut saw them at the door. He leaned against the door and said unhappily, Tang Axian. Tang Axian was shocked. She turned around and looked at her brother. She bit her lip and walked over obediently. Pei Chi-Chi continued to make dinner. Chapter 116. She had never thought that one day she would know who her mother was, and that she would be able to cook for her sister. Tang Yu appeared behind her without a sound. His large hands wrapped around her waist, and his face rested on her shoulder as he leaned over to check on her progress. How much longer? I'm a little hungry. Pei Chi-Chi didn't dare to turn her head, because she would kiss him if she did. Her face was hot, and so was her voice. It's almost done. She paused. Let's make it simpler. It's getting late. He murmured vaguely, but he had no intention of leaving. Tang Axian peeked at them from the door and said mischievously, Chi-Chi, my brother is the most amazing man in the world. Pei Chi-Chi was shocked. She instinctively wanted to push Tang Yu away. She didn't think it was appropriate. However, Tang Yu chuckled and held her waist tightly to prevent her from escaping. Then, he said sternly, Tang Axian, go back to the living room. Tang Axian shrunk back, but after a while, her little head popped out again. Then, she saw a scene that was not suitable for children. Her brother was kissing Chi-Chi. It was the kind of scene in movies where the male and female leads kissed each other deeply and drank each other's saliva. It was so embarrassing. Tang Axian's eyes were wide open, and there were little pink hearts in them. She was young, but she understood. Her brother liked Chi-Chi very much. He had never had such deep contact with a girl before. When Tang Yu let go of Pei Chi-Chi, Pei Chi-Chi's legs were a little weak. If it wasn't for his large hands holding her waist, she would have fallen to the ground. Continue cooking. His hot breath blew behind her ear. Then, he took out his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. He didn't intend to let go of her. Pei Chi-Chi calmed down and continued chopping vegetables, but her hands were still trembling. She heard Tang Yu's voice. It was a little indifferent as he said, Tang Axian is with me. I'll send her back tomorrow. Pei Chi-Chi's body stiffened. She wasn't sure if it was Tang Ziyuan or Zhao Ko. Fortunately, Tang Yu quickly hung up. Tang Axian poked her head out again. Big brother, was that my mom? Tang Yu put away his phone and smiled. No, I called your father. Tang Axian was a little disappointed. After a while, she looked at Tang Yu with some dissatisfaction. Dad is also Big Brother's father. Tang Yu just smiled and said nothing. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and didn't say a word. Her face was flushed from Tang Yu's kiss just now, and now her face had turned pale. On the other side, after Tang Ziyuan hung up the phone, Zhao Ko quickly asked, is he with Tang Yu? Tang Ziyuan nodded. He said he'll send it back tomorrow. Zhao Ko was stunned. Then, without thinking, she said, Ziyuan, let's bring Tang Axian back now, okay? What are you worried about? Do you think Tang Yu will harm Tang Axian? Tang Ziyuan was a little dissatisfied. Tang Yu has always loved Tang Axian. He'll take good care of her. Zhao Ku closed her eyes. I'm just worried that the girl Tang Yu is raising will lead Tang Axian astray. The day had finally come. Tang Axian met Pei Chi-Chi. How long could she keep the secret that Pei Chi-Chi was her daughter? If she hadn't spent 10 million yuan to seal Pei Ming's mouth, the truth would have been exposed long ago. Zhao Ku's heart trembled at the thought of the consequences. Chapter 117. Zhao Ke's words grated on her ears. The flame of war that had just been extinguished suddenly flared up again. Zhao Ke's voice was a little shrill. Tang Ziyuan, I know I'm old and can't be compared to a little girl. But you shouldn't be thinking about your own son. Zhao Ke, what are you talking about? Tang Ziyuan was finally angry. He glared at Zhao Ke with bloodshot eyes. You can think whatever you want. I think you've been living like a prince all these years. You've gotten used to it. Tang Ziyuan went upstairs after he finished speaking. Zhao Ke stood alone in the luxurious living room, gritting her teeth. If she was young, Tang Ziyuan would only coax her. Why would he talk to her like this? Zhao Ke's heart was as cold as ice water. Her face slowly twisted. The atmosphere in the Xia City apartment was very relaxed. Tang Axian kept pestering Pei Qiqi to talk. Pei Qiqi could only deal with it. She was a little tired. Yes, she was tired. Zhou Meilin, Zhao Ke, Pei Huan, Chen Xinjie, and now Tang Axian. She was exhausted both physically and mentally. If any of them appeared in front of her, she would have to arm herself. Otherwise, she would be stabbed all over. Tang Yu glanced at Tang Axian and said calmly, talk less and eat more. Tang Axian nodded and ate obediently. She was a little afraid of Tang Yu and didn't dare to provoke Pei Qiqi anymore. But the effect was short. Soon, Pei Qiqi was pestered by Tang Axian in the bedroom again. When Pei Qiqi came out of the shower, Tang Axian immediately jumped up from the sofa. She stared at Pei Qiqi's clothes and couldn't help but caress the material of her silk pajamas. Tang Yu came out of the study and slapped her hand away. Go to sleep. Tang Axian was obviously disappointed. She nodded and walked out with a bunny in her arms. She looked at Pei Qiqi longingly. She knew that with her illness, she might not live to the age of 20. She wouldn't have a boyfriend in the future, so she was envious of Pei Qiqi. As she walked out, Tang Axian's voice carried a hint of warmth. Qiqi. She dragged her words out. Pei Qiqi didn't hate Tang Axian, but she was afraid to face her. Her mother, who hated her so much, was looking at Tang Axian with such loving eyes. She watched as Tang Axian reluctantly left. Tang Yu's large hand caressed her hair. She raised her head and looked at him helplessly. Tang Yu smiled. Why? Are you afraid of her? Pei Qiqi mumbled as if her tail had been stepped on. I didn't. As she spoke, she thought of something and walked to the changing room to find a set of pajamas that she used to wear. It was the cotton kind. I'll give it to her. Tang Yu picked up a towel to dry his hair. He watched as Pei Qiqi walked out. He was amused. Actually, she couldn't take the provocation. Pei Qiqi brought the pajamas to Tang Axian's room. Tang Axian was holding a glass of water and taking her medicine. Pei Qiqi watched as she grabbed a handful of medicine, swallowed it, and drank some water. Seeing Pei Qiqi standing at the door, Tang Axian put the medicine into her small backpack and smiled. Qiqi, are you coming over to sleep with me? Although Tang Yu was a beast in bed, Pei Qiqi would rather sleep with him. Chapter 118. Tang Axian was all smiles. You're a girl, so you need to take some vitamins. It's good for your skin. Pei Qiqi frowned. You're only a teenager. You don't need these. Tang Axian looked like a princess on the outside, but she was a clown on the inside. She immediately jumped over and hugged Pei Qiqi's arm. She rubbed against it like a kitten. Qiqi, you care about me. Pei Qiqi felt a chill down her spine. She actually ran away. Tang Yu was right. She was afraid of Tang Axian. She was afraid that, she would fall in love with Tang Xan. Back in the bedroom, Tang Yu was leaning against the headboard. He was only wearing a bathrobe. He held a cigarette in his hand, but he did not smoke it. He just held it between his fingers and let it burn. His other hand was holding his phone. He seemed to be reading the news. When he heard Pei Chi-Chi's footsteps, he looked up at her. Tang Xan is asleep. Pei Chi-Chi grunted. Then, she carefully lifted the blanket and laid down. Her head was right beside his waist. Tang Yu still maintained his original position. He looked down at her, then put half of the cigarette on his lips. He took a few deep puffs and quickly finished the cigarette. He put out the cigarette and dimmed the bedside lamp, but he did not turn it off. Pei Chi-Chi's eyes darkened. Then, she grabbed her clothes tightly. She had been living with him for a long time. She could roughly understand his habits. Just now, it was obvious that he was waiting for her. Sure enough, when he leaned against her back, his hand slid down to her waist. He gently undid the belt of her pajamas. Don't. Pei Chi-Chi gasped lightly, her small hands grabbing onto his hand tightly, not letting him move. But the pajamas had already slid down to her waist. His lips were on her thin shoulder. His thin lips were hot, and his voice was hoarse because of Yu Wang. Why? Pei Chi-Chi felt an indescribable heat. She half closed her eyes and said in a broken voice, Tang Xan is next door. She can hear us. As she said that, the person behind her stopped moving. Pei Chi-Chi heaved a sigh of relief and loosened her grip. He let go of her completely and sat up. He straightened his bathrobe, lifted the blanket, and walked out of the door. Pei Chi-Chi kept staring at the door like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. In less than 5 minutes, Tang Yu returned. He gently closed the door and locked it. That sound directly sentenced Pei Chi-Chi to death. Tang Yu's back was against the door, and he smiled faintly. Tang Xan is asleep. Pei Chi-Chi's eyelashes fluttered slightly. Under the dim light, they looked like 2 thick fans, extremely attractive. Tang Yu walked over and sat by himself. Raising his eyebrows, he picked her up and placed her on his body. Tang Yu. In bed, he had always been the dominant one. She did not dare to resist and could only tremble and beg him to let her go, but he was an adult man, and he had never had a woman before her. Now that he was aroused, how could he let her go so easily? That night, she was repressed and broken. Tang Yu had a very wicked sense of humor. The more she repressed herself, the more he bullied her. He only let her sleep after midnight. Pei Chi-Chi nestled in his arms. Her eyelids were pink and her long eyelashes were wet with 2 drops of tears. She looked extremely delicate. Tang Yu was extremely satisfied. He hugged her and coaxed her for a while. Chapter 119. Pei Chi-Chi's body froze. The term cheating was defined as an action that occurred after 2 people entered into a legal marriage, and she did not expect that he would mention this. She turned her back to him and frantically closed her eyes to pretend to be asleep. How could he not know that she was trying to escape? He smiled and bit the back of her soft neck unwillingly. If you dare, I'll spank your little butt. As he said that, he slapped her with his large palm. Smack! Her body had just calmed down, so how could she withstand it? She cried out and raised her head. Tang Yu smiled and pulled her into his arms. He turned around and let her sleep on his arm. Early in the morning, Pei Chi-Chi was shocked when she opened her eyes. In front of her was Tang Xan's magnified face. She looked curiously at Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu sleeping together. If it was possible, Pei Chi-Chi suspected that she would have lifted the blanket to look under it. Tang Yu woke up as well. Faced with Tang Xan's childish behavior, he covered Pei Chi-Chi's body with the blanket and looked at his sister angrily. Tang Xin. I'm just looking, brother. Don't be stingy. Tang Xin smiled sweetly. Tang Yu's face was cold. You're still a child. He did not know how she came in, but after thinking about it, he stretched out his hand. Tang Xin pouted and placed the key in his palm. Tang Yu casually put it into the bedside table. Tang Xin muttered softly, but Chi-Chi is still young. She's still a student. As she said that, Tang Xin made a face at Tang Yu. Brother, you're such a beast. Afraid that Tang Yu would punish her, she ran outside after saying such outrageous words. Coincidentally, the doorbell rang, so Tang Xin opened the door. When the door opened, it was a gloomy Zhao Ku. Mom. Tang Xin's smile froze. She obediently lowered her hands and stood to the side. She then looked behind Zhao Ku. She longed to see Tang Ziyuan. Although her father didn't treat her that affectionately, he wouldn't be like her mother, who was sometimes sunny and sometimes gloomy. Zhao Ku did not look well, and Tang Xin looked as if she had seen a ghost. She had painstakingly raised Tang Xin to this age, and Tang Xin's illness had broken her heart. However, the most important person in Tang Xin's heart was not her mother, but Tang Yu. In the past, she had naively thought that Tang Yu's love for Tang Xin would make up for what she had done to Lin Yun. But after so many years, she realized that Tang Yu's hatred for her had not lessened at all. Zhao Ku looked at Tang Xin. Come back with me. Tang Xin was unwilling. She bit her lips and said, Mom, I haven't had breakfast. Zhao Ku furrowed her brows and looked at her daughter with a displeased expression. Look at what you're wearing. Zhao Ku was born into a poor family, so she raised Tang Xin strictly according to the standards of a virtuous lady. Even though Tang Xin's health was poor and sick, Zhao Ku still insisted on doing things her own way. So, whenever Zhao Ku and Tang Ziyuan quarreled, she would carry her bag and look for Tang Yu. Zhao Ku scolded her, and then went on to scold her. Tang Xin secretly stuck out her tongue. Just then, Tang Yu came out. He was still wearing a bathrobe, and he frowned at Zhao Ku. Chapter 120. Tang Xin turned around and looked at Tang Yu pitifully. Brother, I haven't had breakfast yet. Tang Yu looked at her and then at Zhao Ku. He asked Tang Xin, have you taken your medicine? Tang Xin clenched her fists and said in a small voice, not yet, I'm going to take it now. Zhao Ku felt as if she had been slapped in the face. Tang Yu had calmly accused her of neglecting Tang Xin's health. She stood there, not feeling very good. She was the mistress of the Tang family, but Tang Yu didn't even bother to be polite when she stood in front of his door. Tang Yu quickly walked into the bedroom to change his clothes and treated Zhao Ku as heir. Pei Chi-Chi didn't know that Zhao Ku was there. She put on a long white t-shirt and tied her hair up with a black hairband. After a simple wash, she went to the kitchen to make breakfast. Auntie Li hadn't been coming lately. She didn't know if it was Tang Yu's idea. She didn't ask because she didn't have the right. So when she walked out and saw Zhao Ku, she wasn't prepared. Pei Chi-Chi just stood there. Zhao Ku was also a little shocked. Knowing and seeing were two different things. Those beautiful but not very young eyes stared at Pei Chi-Chi's youthful body. There were traces of Tang Yu on it. This made Zhao Ku jealous. All her life, she wanted to find someone who was worthy of her. But even Tang Ziyuan had to make do with it, not to mention Pei Mingyi. As for Tang Yu, his appearance was outstanding, and his temperament was cold. There was not a single part of him that didn't resemble that person. When Zhao Ku looked at Tang Yu, it wasn't the feeling of a senior looking at a junior. In addition to jealousy, there was contempt in her eyes. Pei Chi-Chi felt a stab of pain in her heart. She lowered her head and walked towards the kitchen, not intending to have any conflict with Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku stopped her. Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi stopped and looked up at Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku took a few steps forward and lowered her voice. If you're smart, you'll know what you shouldn't say. Pei Chi-Chi looked at her and did not speak for a long time. The first time they met, she felt that Zhao Ku looked very similar to her, and she recognized her mother at a glance. But now, when she looked at the same face, why did she feel that it was unfamiliar? It didn't look like her at all. Zhao Ku's voice became even colder. You should know that if Tang Yu finds out that you're my daughter, you won't be able to stay by his side. Thank you for your concern. Pei Chi-Chi did not smile at all. Mrs. Tang, don't worry. I've never had a mother. I only have a father named Pei Mingyi. Zhao Ku's expression was a little twisted, and her facial muscles were trembling. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she held it in. Pei Chi-Chi did not speak to her anymore. She walked towards the kitchen, leaving Zhao Ku standing there. She murmured, how can you be Pei Mingyi's daughter? How can a man like that deserve to have a child with me? Zhao Ku suddenly raised her head, and her body trembled violently. She walked out as if she could not control herself. After a while, she called Tang Xian. I'll be leaving first. Ask your brother to send you back in the afternoon, or your father and I will come and pick you up. Tang Xian had just finished taking her medicine. She was happy to hear that, but when she ran out, Zhao Ku was already gone. She breathed a sigh of relief and walked to the kitchen. She saw that Pei Chi-Chi was preparing breakfast. Tang Yu also came out of the bedroom. His wardrobe was filled with white shirts and suits. The styles were almost the same, but Pei Chi-Chi knew that they were different. Chapter 121. Tang Yu did not ask where Zhao Ku was going. He sat at the dining table, looking refreshed. Since he still had to wait for a while, he picked up the newspaper and started reading. Tang Xian did not manage to pester Pei Chi-Chi in the kitchen, so she walked out and sat beside Tang Yu. She leaned over and whispered, Brother, why do you always ask Chi-Chi to cook? Is there something wrong? Tang Yu flipped the page and asked without looking up. Tang Xian tugged at his arm. Look, my mom is either doing her beauty treatments or painting her nails. Or she's dressed up to go out to play with people. Chi-Chi has to go to school and do the house chores. It's too tiring. Tang Yu glanced at his sister and said calmly, she still has to work. She's at Xingyuan High School for 2 hours in the afternoon. Tang Xian widened her eyes and stared at her brother. Then, she has to accompany you at night. Isn't it tiring? Finally, Tang Yu closed the newspaper and looked at Tang Xian seriously. Just then, Pei Chi-Chi came over with breakfast. He looked up and said slowly, I'm the one who's tired. Pei Chi-Chi did not hear what he said. She sat down and ate her breakfast quietly. Tang Xian, on the other hand, was greatly shocked. She was taught a lesson by her brother. After Tang Yu finished speaking, he continued eating with a serious face. Tang Xian stole glances at Pei Chi-Chi from time to time. In her eyes, Pei Chi-Chi was unbelievably beautiful. Although Tang Xian was pretty herself, she seemed to be lacking something when compared to Pei Chi-Chi. She was an art student, so she quickly thought of a word, rich. Yes, Chi-Chi's beauty was like an oil painting that went deep into her bones. She looked at her brother again. Soon, Tang Yu had turned into a pile of bones. He was dead. Tang Xian buried her head and smiled secretly. She was in a good mood. It was rare for Tang Yu to see her like this. Actually, Chi-Chi had a cold personality. He did not know why Tang Xian liked her so much. It was fine as long as she liked her. Hurry up and eat breakfast. I'll take you to the company later. We'll go home tonight. He knocked on Tang Xian's head. Tang Xian smiled. I want to go to school with Chi-Chi. Tang Xian smiled. I want to go to school with Chi-Chi. Tang Yu naturally saw a hint of desire in her eyes, but he still didn't agree. Or I'll send you back directly. I choose the company. Tang Xian raised her hand and winked at Pei Chi-Chi. Her eyes were very bright and clear. Pei Chi-Chi was dazed for a moment and was also caught by it. Tang Xian was very lively, which was what she yearned for. She was also Zhao Ke's daughter, but her experiences were completely different from Tang Xian's. However, she really could not hate Tang Xian. She lowered her head and continued eating her breakfast, but Tang Xian pouted and asked, Chi-Chi, do you not like me? She looked at Tang Yu. Tang Yu did not help her. He continued reading the newspaper. Pei Chi-Chi turned her head. Tang Xian was like a puppy that saw a bone. She was biting on it. Pei Chi-Chi turned around. Tang Xian's expression was like that of a puppy that had seen a bone. She would not let go. When she was with Pei Huan, she was always teasing and sarcastic. Tang Xian was a cute, gentle, and passionate little thing. When he was with Pei Huan, there was only mockery and sarcasm. Tang Xian, on the other hand, was a cute, gentle, and passionate little thing. Tang Xian understood her. She held her hand happily. Then, Chi-Chi, you like me. Chapter 122. Tang Xian rubbed against Pei Chi-Chi like a puppy, almost nibbling on her. Tang Yu smiled. Let's go. Was this a form of rejection? Tang Xian followed him obediently. Pei Chi-Chi had also finished eating. They went downstairs together. Pei Chi-Chi saw that Tang Xian was there, so she wanted to sit in the back seat. Tang Xian is still underage, you sit in the front. Tang Yu looked at her and said. Pei Chi-Chi had no choice but to sit in the front. Tang Xian sat in the back and excitedly clung to the seat in front, wanting to chat with Pei Chi-Chi. At first, Pei Chi-Chi only thought that Tang Xian was lively, but when she found out that Tang Xian didn't go to school, she realized that Tang Xian was just lonely. She wanted to ask why she didn't go to school, but it wasn't something she could ask. Tang Yu parked the car in front of B University. Pei Chi-Chi got out of the car, and Tang Xian sat in the car, waving her hands. He continued driving and looked at the rear-view mirror. Tang Xian was still clinging to the car door, looking at Pei Chi-Chi. After a while, Tang Xian turned around and looked at Tang Yu's back. Brother, you like Chi-Chi a lot, don't you? Tang Yu's slender fingers were on the steering wheel. He smiled silently and casually nodded. Tang Xian immediately leaned over and put her face next to Tang Yu's ear. Brother, did you notice? Chi-Chi's butt is really perky, and her hair is really straight. And, they're really big. Although Tang Yu agreed with what Tang Xian said, but Tang Yu was thinking that Zhao Ke wanted to groom Tang Xian into a socialite, but now it seemed that her education had failed. Tang Xian. His ear was a little hot as he scolded in a low voice. Tang Xian didn't dare to say anything more and sat back down. But after a while, she couldn't help but say, Chi-Chi's waist is pretty slim too. Tang Yu couldn't be bothered with her anymore. When they arrived at the company, he threw her to Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran and Tang Xian were already very familiar with each other, so he was more than happy to accept it. He even had his men prepare a lot of snacks for her. In the past, Tang Xian was very happy in Xingyuan because she could escape from Zhao Ke's control. But today, she was counting down the time, staring at Pei Chi-Chi, hoping that she would come sooner. She was wrong. She should have gotten Chi-Chi's phone number so that she could call and ask. Now, she did not dare to ask her brother. Tang Axian rested her chin on her hand and sighed. She didn't understand why she liked Chi-Chi so much. Maybe it was because her brother liked her. Pei Chi-Chi picked up her bag and prepared to leave after class. Chen Xinjie chased after her, panting a little. Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi stopped and looked at Chen Xinjie with a faint smile. Chen Xinjie walked out with her and asked, Chi-Chi, how are you and Tangyu these days? We're fine. Pei Chi-Chi said casually. Chen Xinjie felt that Pei Chi-Chi was not treating her like before. She walked quickly to Pei Chi-Chi and bit her lip. Chi-Chi, I didn't do it on purpose. I just thought that you would still, like Lin Jinrong like before. Pei Chi-Chi stopped in her tracks. She looked at Chen Xinjie and said slowly, Lin Jinrong and Pei Huan are going to get married soon. No matter what, Pei Huan and I are sisters. She was not a person without principles. Putting aside the matter between her and Tang Yu, even if Pei Huan did something, she and Lin Jinrong were engaged. Moreover, Pei Huan was pregnant and they were going to get married soon. If she acted like before, she would feel disgusted. Chapter 123. Chen Xinjie heaved a sigh of relief. You're right, Chi-Chi. You're different from that coquettish bitch, Pei Huan. Pei Chi-Chi changed the topic. I'm going to Xingyuan now. Chen Xinjie actually wanted to mention that she was going to Xingyuan, but Pei Chi-Chi was obviously a little cold. Pei Chi-Chi took the bus to Xingyuan. When she arrived at the entrance of the company, she saw Tang Axian squatting there. Why are you here? Pei Chi-Chi walked over and looked at the petite figure. An indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. It was a feeling that she didn't want to admit. Tang Axian. Her sister. Pei Huan had never given her such a feeling. Tang Axian raised her petite face and said pitifully, Chi-Chi, why are you so late? I've been waiting for a long time. She stretched out her fair and delicate hand. Chi-Chi, help me. My feet are numb. Pei Chi-Chi was a little helpless, but she still reached out to help her. Tang Axian took the opportunity to freeload a little. Even if she knew, Pei Chi-Chi pretended not to know. Tang Axian immediately went into puppy mode when she saw Pei Chi-Chi. She hugged Pei Chi-Chi's arm and tried to please her. Chi-Chi, it's hot outside, right? Brother's office has air conditioning and lots of delicious food. He's not here now. Pei Chi-Chi walked into the elevator with her. I have to work. Tang Axian's eyes were full of stars. I helped you apply for leave. After that, she carefully looked at Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi looked back at her and didn't say anything for a long time. Tang Axian plucked up her courage and pulled her little hand. Chi-Chi, I just think that you're working too hard. Just one day, I promise. Because she wouldn't be here tomorrow. Pei Chi-Chi found it both funny and annoying. She imitated Tang Yu and knocked on Tang Axian's head. You really didn't do it for yourself. Tang Axian rubbed her head like a puppy again. Chi-Chi is the best. As expected, Tang Yu wasn't in the office. Pei Chi-Chi was being pestered by Tang Axian to chat and play games on her phone. It was rare for Tang Axian to relax. She laid on the sofa with her round stomach and whined. Chi-Chi, did you know that my mom doesn't allow me to eat too much? She's afraid that I'll gain weight. But she was still a baby. Besides, she didn't have much longer to live. She wasn't sure of it. Wouldn't it be too sad if she couldn't eat more? But she was still a baby. Of her, Tang Axian thought. She didn't. And of. Pei Chi-Chi smiled faintly. Tang Axian rolled around on the sofa again. I wish Daddy and Mommy would fight once a week. That way, I can come out more often. Tang Chi-Chi. And Chi. Of Chi. Pei Chi-Chi's heart softened. She used to think that she would never soften for anyone other than Pei Mingi. But Tang Axian was so cute, so innocent. Pei Chi-Chi held a book in her hand and looked at Tang Axian. Tang Axian winked at her again. As if possessed, Pei Chi-Chi reached out and gently touched Tang Axian's hair. Tang Axian stopped moving. She lay there and stared at Pei Chi-Chi. After a long time, she asked softly, Chi-Chi, you really didn't consider making me stay today? Pei Chi-Chi retracted her hand. She grunted and looked back at the book. You're just like my brother. Tang Axian pouted. You're such a hypocrite. Pei Chi-Chi looked at her. Chapter 124. Big Brother. Tang Axian threw herself at him and hugged him. Tang Yu removed the little monkey from his body and snorted. What did you say about me just now? Tang Axian bit her little finger. Did I? I don't really remember. Tang Yu bent down and knocked on her little head. He then turned to look at Pei Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi, you speak. His tone was like he was talking to two little kids. Pei Chi-Chi, who was pretending to be reading, had no choice but to look up at him. Oh, she said slowly, Tang Axian just praised you. You're amazing. Tang Yu smiled. Is that so? He then pressed Tang Axian's little face against his chest and covered her little ears to prevent her from listening. He leaned forward slightly and moved closer to Pei Chi-Chi's ear. His beautiful thin lips pressed against her little ear, and his voice was hoarse with a hint of a smile. What about you? Do you think I'm amazing too? As he said that, he raised his head slightly and focused on admiring her little face that had suddenly turned red. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip. Her eyes seemed to be stained with a thin layer of water as she stared at him. Tang Axian squirmed in Tang Yu's arms like a caterpillar. Her little face was red, but he still pressed his little sister down and looked at Pei Chi-Chi with determination. Then, he lowered his head slightly and kissed her on the lips. His voice was a little hoarse. Let's try tonight. Pei Chi-Chi did not want to try at all, but with Tang Axian around, she did not dare to say a word. Tang Yu smiled and finally let go of Tang Axian. What are you guys talking about? Tang Axian looked at one of them and asked in confusion. Tang Yu chuckled. He got up and walked to his desk to deal with work. Chi-Chi, why is your face so red? Tang Axian stared at Pei Chi-Chi's face and asked seriously. Pei Chi-Chi looked down at the book in her hand. No. Of course you are. No. Yes, I do. You can take a look in the mirror. Tang Axian was very honest. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't hold it in any longer. She looked up and coughed. Shut up. I'm telling the truth. Tang Axian said anxiously. Then, she stretched out her hand to feel it. I don't have a fever, Pei Chi-Chi glared at her, while Tang Yu chuckled. Pei Chi-Chi ignored Tang Axian. Tang Axian pestered her for a long time, but to no avail, until it was time to get off work. Tang Axian said pitifully, Chi-Chi, I'm about to leave, can't you just smile? Pei Chi-Chi gave him a fake smile. That's not pretty. Let's do another one. Tang Axian was like a sticky candy. Pei Chi-Chi really wondered if she and Tang Yu had the same father. Even if their birth mothers were different, the difference was too big. The first time she saw Tang Axian and Tang Yu, they looked more like siblings. Now, she couldn't explain it in words. Tang Yu closed his notebook and looked at the two girls. All right, let's go eat. As he said that, his phone rang. It was Tang Ziyuan. Tang Yu answered the call casually. His eyes fell on Tang Xian. Tang Xian shrank back and looked at Tang Yu pitifully. After he hung up, she said with a bitter face, "Brother. They're waiting for you downstairs," Tang Yu said calmly. Tang Xian wanted to struggle, but when she saw Tang Yu's expression, she didn't say anything. Chapter 125. "Oh," Tang Xian said dejectedly. Every strand of her hair seemed to be filled with sadness. Pei Chi looked at her and thought of what Tang Xian said. She hoped that Tang Ziyuan and Zhao Ku would quarrel more often. She felt an indescribable heartache. Tang Xian walked over and hugged her. It was a bear hug. Her voice was also a little sad. "Chi, I have to go. Can you send me down?" Pei Chi didn't want to see Zhao Ku, but she couldn't reject Tang Xian at this moment. She was so sad and couldn't bear to leave her. He nodded and pushed Tang Xian a little further away from him. Tang Xian sniffled and said to Tang Yu, "Brother, I'm leaving." Tang Yu sighed and came over to help her carry her backpack. He ruffled her hair and said, "I'll pick you up next time." Actually, Tang Xian knew that her brother was just saying it. He liked her, but he was also worried about his mother. He couldn't be in contact with her often. She nodded softly and carried her backpack with a teddy bear in her arms. "Chi, let's go." Pei Chi looked at her sad face and almost wanted to ask her to stay. But who was she? What right did she have to ask her to stay? She suddenly felt like her throat was blocked. She couldn't explain it, but she still held Tang Xian's hand and walked her to the first floor. In the hall on the first floor, Tang Ziyuan was standing and admiring the famous paintings on the wall. Zhao Ku was standing straight with her eyes on the elevator entrance. Her whole body was tense. When she saw Pei Chi, there was a hint of danger in her beautiful eyes. Tang Xian walked over slowly and said in a low voice, "Mom." Zhao Ku said in a low voice and not too gently, "Go back to the car with your dad." Tang Xian nodded and walked in front of Tang Ziyuan. Tang Ziyuan smiled gently and said, "Your mom and I will take you to eat your favorite French food later." Tang Xian made a face in her mind. Her mother liked French food because she thought it was too classy. She never liked it. She would rather eat Chi-Chi's stir-fried pork. It was delicious. Tang Xian was a little embarrassed. Tang Ziyuan placed his hand on Tang Xian's shoulder. He looked at Pei Chi and said politely, "Thank you for taking care of Tang Xian for the whole day." Pei Chi just smiled. Zhao Ku's expression darkened as she watched Tang Ziyuan and Tang Xian leave. "Pei Chi, don't even think about using Tang Xian. Even if you try to please her, it won't bring you anything, let alone marry into the Tang family." Pei Chi was already numb to Zhao Ku's words. She smiled faintly and said in an indifferent tone, "Mrs. Tang, aren't you the one who used Tang Xian to marry into the Tang family?" Zhao Ku's expression became livid as she stared fixedly at Pei Chi. "Mrs. Tang, not everyone is like you." Pei Chi didn't want to talk to her anymore. She turned and walked towards the elevator. Zhao Ku was furious. She looked at Pei Chi-Chi's back and blurted out, "Do you think Tang Yu is true to you? Do you know about his past?" Pei Chi-Chi's body froze. A bitter smile appeared on her face. Tang Yu's past was not something she could care about. It was not something she could pursue. He bought her. He might like her today, but he might not like her the next day. If she took it seriously, she would be very pitiful. Chapter 126. She had tried so hard to get that person's attention, but to no avail. That person slept with her and even made her pregnant twice, but he still didn't want her. That person was like Tang Yu, almost without a heart. But now, Tang Yu liked Pei Chi. Zhao Ku was a woman who had had many men. She knew what a man looked like when he liked a woman. Pei Chi returned to the top floor and didn't speak again. Tang Yu was on the phone, and he glanced at her as he spoke. There was a faint smile on his face. It was very faint, and it softened the usual stern lines on his face. Holding the phone, the pair of black diamond cufflinks on his snow-white cufflinks glistened. Coupled with his calm demeanor, he looked very pleasing to the eye. Pei Chi stood and looked at him for about 5 seconds before sitting down. When she picked up the book again, she was already a little upset and couldn't focus on it. She didn't know if it was because of Zhao Ku, or because of Tang Yu. Tang Yu's gaze drifted over, then he smiled faintly and ended the call. He tidied up his desk. Chi, let's go. She looked up absent-mindedly and then looked at the time. It was only 5:30 p.m. I said we'd eat out today. He looked at her, his gaze a little focused. Oh, Pei Chi replied. Tang Yu walked over and helped her carry her bag. He carried it himself, and Pei Chi followed beside him. Although she still wasn't used to having a super diamond-like president of Xingyuan beside her, she had to get used to it. He seemed to be enjoying it very much. Tang Yu didn't take her to a particularly high-end restaurant. Instead, he took her to a private restaurant. He was probably a frequent visitor, so he was very familiar with it. The manager came over personally and brought them to a private room. Mr. Tang, are we still going by the usual rules? Tang Yu sat down and lightly grunted in acknowledgement. The manager left. Tang Yu poured a cup of hot water for Pei Chi. Pei Chi was flattered and wanted to stand up to serve him. His fingers held onto her little hand. Even though he only used a little bit of force, he forcefully held her there, rendering her unable to move. Drink some water. He finally let go of her. At that moment, Pei Chi felt her legs turn to jelly. Tang Yu just smiled and took a sip of water. Fortunately, the manager came in with a waiter and quickly served the dishes. There were about 6 dishes, 1 soup, and 1 dessert. Pei Chi rarely had the chance to eat desserts. It wasn't that Zhou Meilin treated her so harshly, but that she wasn't in the mood to do so. Looking at the flaming ice cream, she was a little dazed. Pinching her cheeks, she asked, "What's wrong?" Before she could speak, Tang Yu had moved the dessert in front of her and smiled. "Do you want to eat it now?" Pei Chi raised her eyes and looked at him blankly. "Silly." He smiled faintly and rubbed her hair. "Just a little is enough. Eat more." Pei Chi nodded. She was more or less not used to it. She had been with him for more than a month, but they had never eaten out together. It seemed that something was different. She couldn't tell, and she felt uneasy. She felt a little uncomfortable during the meal. After the meal, she thought that they would go back directly, but Tang Yu took her to a shopping center. The largest and most complete collection of luxury goods in B City was gathered there. Chapter 127. Seeing that Tang Yu was noble, the salesperson was particularly warm and sweet, and tried hard to introduce the new products in the store. Tang Yu said lightly, "Pick a suitable watch for this lady." That was because Chi had taken out her phone to check the time today. Pei Chi subconsciously refused, "I don't want." Her voice was weak, with a touch of emotion that she didn't dare to anger him. He just rubbed her hair and walked to the women's watch counter. The salesperson naturally came back to her senses quickly. Her mind was like a mirror, and she enthusiastically recommended the latest watches to Pei Chi. "Miss, please take a look at these models. They are new models that have just arrived a few days ago, and there is only one in this city. You can't buy them anywhere else. The watches of this brand were relatively simple, focusing on fashion and low-key luxury. Pei-Chi-Chi studied design, and she felt that the design of the watch was very good at a glance, but the price was also good. The cheapest one was more than 300,000 yuan. She looked up at Tang Yu. She didn't speak, but he knew what she was thinking. Tang Yu smiled and pointed to a platinum watch. Take a look at this one. The salesperson was suddenly ecstatic. It should be known that this watch was more than 1 million yuan, and she didn't have to worry about the sales of this month. She wore white gloves on her face, took out the watch, and handed it to Tang Yu. Tang Yu looked at Pei-Chi-Chi, and her expression, he was amused in his heart, and he coughed softly, "Give me your hand." Pei-Chi-Chi wasn't stupid, and she didn't want to embarrass a man like Tang Yu. Although she felt that it was expensive, she didn't say it out, and obediently stretched out her hand. The platinum watch had a sapphire dial, and the color of the numbers inside changed. It was a watch suitable for young girls, and it looked indescribably beautiful on Pei-Chi-Chi's hand. This one. Obviously, Tang Yu was a person who liked to make decisions quickly. Pei-Chi-Chi didn't object, thinking that he was going to pay the bill. However, Tang Yu asked the waiter, "Is there a men's watch of the same style?" The waitress could no longer maintain her reserved expression. Her face was about to freeze from the smile. She said repeatedly, "Yes, yes, please wait a moment." She carefully took out a men's watch. Naturally, it was more expensive, close to 2 million yuan. Tang Yu took off his original watch. The waiter secretly looked at it, and was shocked. That watch was worth tens of millions. Now, in order to wear a couple's watch with a girl, he was actually willing to change it to a watch worth 2 million. She looked at Pei-Chi-Chi enviously and sighed in her heart. It was no wonder that he was so pampered with such a face. Tang Yu's original model was naturally more stable. He looked at it silently and frowned. Pei-Chi-Chi thought that he was dissatisfied and hoped that he would not buy it. It was weird to wear a couple's watch, however. Tang Yu smiled and said, "Give me the bill." From the counter until they sat in the car, Pei-Chi-Chi felt that her wrist was heavy, as if Tang Yu had bound it with something. Of course, she didn't dare to take it off. Tang Yu casually threw the box of the watch he was originally wearing into the back seat of the car. He turned his head and looked at Pei-Chi-Chi. "Do you like it?" Pei-Chi-Chi felt that he asked a little too late, but she still smiled and said, "I like it." He smiled, put one hand on the steering wheel, and started the car. This movement also allowed her to see the watch on his hand clearly. It was so natural on his wrist, just like her. Chapter 128. He was actually interested in chatting with her for a while. He asked casually, "Do you like Tang Xian?" Pei-Chi-Chi sat up a little unnaturally. Tang Yu's casual attitude made her a little wary. This wasn't the Tang Yu at work, but the Tang Yu who was very casual. He didn't seem to mind exposing some of his habits in front of her, such as smoking while driving. When Pei-Chi-Chi thought of Tang Xian, her expression softened a little. "I like her. She's quite cute." Tang Yu held the steering wheel with one hand holding a cigarette between his fingers. Occasionally, he would take a puff. He wasn't a man who smoked often, but the way he smoked was very pleasing to the eye. When he heard what she said, he smiled. "Really?" He paused, and then turned to look at her and smiled again. "You're quite cute too. I like you too." Pei-Chi-Chi was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect him to say that at this time. Moreover, Tang Yu was such a mature and introverted man. Moreover, he was a businessman, a very successful one at that. In Pei-Chi-Chi's heart, such a man would never say the word like. She didn't know how to respond at that moment. After a long time, she lowered her eyes. At this time, it was already dark. The street lights slowly lit up, and the road looked like a long fire dragon. However, it was very dark inside the car. Occasionally, the car lights outside would shine in and into her eyes, dyeing them with a layer of brilliance. Pei Chi-Chi's long eyelashes fluttered, and her voice was very soft. Tang Yu, what do you like about me? Tang Yu finished smoking and put out the cigarette. Then, he looked at the little girl beside him. She seemed to be very confused. He patted the back of her hand with a faint smile on his face. Then, he said very slowly, probably, just like what Tang Xan said. Pei Chi-Chi was really listening very seriously. Tang Xan said that your hair is very black and straight, your back is also very nice, and your butt is very perky. Mr. Tang said very seriously, but he still chuckled at the end. Pei Chi-Chi glared at him. With a fierce look in his eyes, Tang Yu's lips curled up in delight. She didn't know that she was cute enough without these external conditions. After that, they didn't speak anymore. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was turned away from the window, watching the streetlights flash by. Counting like this, they quickly arrived at the apartment in Xia City. The car stopped, and her back bumped against the back of the seat. She came back to her senses and quietly unbuckled her seatbelt. Just as she was about to open the car door, her other hand was pressed down by Tang Yu. She turned her head sideways to look at him. So did he. He looked at her quietly with his handsome face. His dark eyes were filled with an indescribable radiance that was especially bright. Pei Chi-Chi realized that it was Yu Wang. Suddenly, she felt that her lips were very dry and it was difficult for her to breathe. The narrow interior of the car made it even more cramped. Pei Chi-Chi realized that her legs were weak and her heart was trembling. That feeling of powerlessness came again. Her entire body had lost all resistance. Every breath she took was filled with his pure masculine scent, enveloping her. She watched as his face came closer inch by inch, and her eyes widened. Tang Yu chuckled. His warm large palms covered her eyes, and at the same time, his thin lips kissed her little mouth. Pei Chi-Chi almost jumped up. His lips were hot like magma. She instinctively struggled, but he immediately grabbed her wrist and pressed it to the side of his body. Chapter 129. Tang Yu chuckled softly and deepened the kiss. He lifted her little face and adjusted it so that he could deepen the kiss. He had never kissed her like this before, so deeply and deeply. Pei Chi-Chi was a little scared. It was as if he was exploring her soul instead of just kissing her. Her body was limp, weak, trembling, and struggling uncomfortably. 2 tears rolled down from the corner of her eyes. They slid onto their skin, which was cold and uncomfortable. He paused for a while. Although he did not let her go immediately, he slowed down and kissed her gently as if he was coaxing her. Pei Chi-Chi felt like she was like duckweed, unable to find her roots. She could only lean on him, her little hands hooked around his neck, and she could only, with difficulty, breathe along with him. After a long time, Tang Yu finally moved away from her little mouth, but his forehead was still pressed against hers. He was not much better himself. His breathing was rapid, and his heart was racing. Because of the kiss, the temperature in the car rose, and the smell of passion was everywhere. She did not know when he had leaned forward, and his whole body was pressed against hers, her little hands hooked around his neck, and her fingers touched his shirt. His shirt was a little warm from the thin layer of sweat. He moved a little away, and Pei Chi-Chi felt a little cold. She hugged his neck with her little hands, not letting him go. Tang Yu's body stiffened, and his muscles tensed up, but his voice was very gentle. Calling her baby in such a dark night, he buried his face in her hair and coaxed her gently, "Baby, let's get off the car." Pei Chi-Chi came back to her senses after a while. When she was a little clearer, she looked at his smiling eyes, and her little face was a little red. She suddenly let go of him. Tang Yu chuckled softly and got off the car first. Then, he walked to her side, opened the door, and carried her up. Pei Chi was uneasy. He patted her and said, "Be good, don't move." He carried her into the elevator with his briefcase in one hand. In order not to fall off, Pei Chi could only hug his neck. Her little face was buried in his Hun's mouth like a little kitten, clinging to him until his soul left his body. Tang Yu lowered his head and suddenly kissed her little mouth, as if he couldn't bear it any longer. He wasn't as aggressive as before. He just kissed her gently and lightly, sometimes deeply. Pei Chi had nowhere to hide, so she turned her face away weakly. Tang Yu pressed her against the elevator wall and chuckled hoarsely. Pei Chi's little face was on his shoulder, and she lightly punched him. Damn it! When the lift arrived, he carried her back to the apartment. When he put down his things, Pei Chi's men had already left. Tang Yu smiled, poured himself a glass of red wine, and slowly drank it. After that, she took her bathrobe to the bathroom and took a shower. When she came out, the bedroom was still quiet. He put the watch on the bedside table and saw Pei Chi's watch on the other side. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he didn't say anything, but walked into the study. Pei Chi was sitting at a small desk, reading a book, and there was a test paper in front of her. He pushed the door open, and she looked up, especially when she saw that he was only wearing a bathrobe. Tang Yu closed the door slowly and walked over. How much longer? It was almost 9 o'clock. Pei Chi bit the end of her pen and said softly, "About 2 hours. Chapter 130. He sat down, stretched out his long arm, and pulled out an original book from the bookshelf beside him. He read it leisurely. Pei Chi looked at him quietly, then lowered her head and continued to write the paper. She would look up the information occasionally, and when she couldn't answer, she would frown, and her expression was quite cute. This was what Tang Yu thought. He rarely spent time alone with someone, but at this moment, he actually felt that it was wonderful. Under the dim yellow light, Pei Chi propped her head on her hand. There was a question that she had been thinking about for a long time, but she couldn't think of it. Tang Yu put down the book in his hand and raised his eyebrows. "You don't know?" Pei Chi looked at him and replied, Let me see." His tone was indifferent. Pei Chi hesitated for a moment, then she got up and walked over to show him the paper. She pointed at one of the questions. "This is it." She stood up straight like a primary school student. That look was quite cute. Tang Yu glanced at her, then lowered his head to take a few glances. Then, he knocked her head. "Idiot." Pei Chi bit her lip and didn't say anything. His hand moved up and caught her little hand. Very naturally, he pulled her into his embrace. He rested his chin on the top of her head, smiled, and began to guide her on how to answer the question. After he explained it to her, he knocked her head again. "Got it?" He hugged her like that, and her head felt like it was mush. She had no idea what he was talking about. She sat in his arms without moving or making a sound. Chi. He held her little chin and forced her to look up at him. Pei Chi felt like her neck was about to break. She whimpered, "I don't understand." He looked at her for a long time before he reached out and put her on his lap. Pei Chi felt even more uncomfortable. She pursed her lips and looked at him. "Call me brother," he suddenly said. Pei Jin's eyes widened. She couldn't believe that he would be so perverted. Actually, he didn't ask her to call him anything else. Tang Yu pinched her little face and smiled faintly. "I'm 6 years older than you." Chi, isn't it normal to call me brother?" It was normal. But their relationship, if he called it that, it would be a little perverted. Pei Chi couldn't say it out loud, so he didn't force her. He explained it in detail again. Fortunately, his little friend wasn't too stupid, and this time she understood. Pei Chi immediately jumped off his lap and focused on writing her paper. Tang Yu smiled and picked up the book again. It was very quiet in the study room. He was sitting, and she was lying on her stomach. This scene was as beautiful as an oil painting. Tang Yu would glance at her from time to time. Later, she was so engrossed in her writing that she didn't notice when he went out to pour her a glass of water. It wasn't until 10:30 p.m. that Pei Chi finished writing. She looked up and saw that Tang Yu was still reading. She said a little embarrassedly, "I'm done." He looked up quietly and looked into her eyes. Pei Chi felt a little uneasy and pursed her lips. "Go take a shower and sleep," he said faintly. Then he put down the book and walked out. Pei Chi had been feeling uneasy that night. When she came out of the bathroom, she saw that the bedside lamp in the bedroom had been switched off. She heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that he wasn't in the mood tonight. As it turned out, Pei Chi was still too naive. When she lifted the blanket and wanted to lie down, her body was suddenly lifted up. The next second, she was under him. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."